With her jet black bob and hypnotic stare, Louise Brooks redefined beauty and rebellion in the silent film era. Pandora's Box turned her into an international icon, the face of modern womanhood, decades ahead of her time. But behind that porcelain smile and cinematic glow was a darkness too real for Hollywood to handle. Ignored by the studios she once dazzled, betrayed by the men who claimed to love her, and consumed by alcohol and despair, Louise vanished into poverty and silence. How could a woman worshipped by Europe's greatest directors die forgotten in a tiny apartment surrounded only by her ghosts? This video reveals the full, never-before-told truth behind Louise Brooks. The trauma that shaped her, the rebellion that destroyed her, and the haunting legacy that made her immortal. Before she became the shimmering goddess of the silent screen, Louise Brooks was a lonely child in a house that never felt like home. Born in Cherryvale, Kansas in 1906, she grew up under a roof where silence spoke louder than affection. Her father, Leonard Brooks, was a lawyer who preferred law books to lullabies. Her mother, Myra, a pianist with a sharp tongue and colder heart, once said that her children could take care of themselves. A distavid, base den. That sentence, cruel in its casualness, became the blueprint of Louise's life. Fend for yourself. Feel nothing. When she was just 9, a trusted neighbor invited her to play and then assaulted her. She carried that secret like a shard of glass for years, until she finally told her mother. Myra's reply cut deeper than the crime itself. "You must have led him on." From that day forward, love became a dangerous word, one that Louise associated with guilt, shame, and betrayal. She found her first escape in movement: dancing. On the stage, her body spoke the emotions her voice could not. At 15, she joined the prestigious Denishan Dance Company, the same troupe that once trained Martha Graham. But even there, she was labeled too defiant, too unwilling to bow to hierarchy. When the founder, Ruth St. Dennis, dismissed her, saying, "You want life handed to you on a silver platter," Louise left without looking back. That rejection didn't break her. It hardened her resolve. She learned that talent meant nothing without obedience, and obedience was something she would never give. Her defiance drew attention in New York's art circles, and soon the glowing lights of Hollywood came calling. Yet beneath her magnetic smile, the wounds festered. Every camera flash reminded her of what had been stolen. Innocence, safety, trust. She had learned to transform pain into performance, charm into armor. The world saw a fearless woman. In truth, she was a wounded child, still proving she couldn't be tamed. Louise Brooks's rebellion didn't begin in Hollywood. It began in a small Kansas living room with a mother's indifference and a sentence that turned a victim into a sinner. When Louise Brooks arrived in Hollywood, she didn't just enter the spotlight. She redefined it. Her jet black bob and piercing stare sliced through the sugary innocence that dominated 1,920-second cinema. She wasn't a good girl, nor did she pretend to be. Directors didn't quite know what to do with her. She was too modern, too intelligent, too dangerous for the roles women were supposed to play. Yet that danger was exactly what the world couldn't look away from. By 1925, she was the face of a new generation. The flapper queen who smoked, laughed too loudly, and moved like she owned her body. She joined Paramount Pictures and appeared in films like The American Venus and A Girl in Every Port, earning more in a week than her father had made in a year. Crowds adored her. The press called her the girl who moves like jazz. But beneath that effortless allure, Louise was fighting a silent war against conformity. Hollywood demanded compliance. Smile for the photographers, charm the producers, and play the game. Brooks refused all three. When a studio executive suggested she cultivate a softer reputation, she famously replied, "Why should I pretend to be dull?" Her refusal to bow came with a price. In an era when studio contracts were little more than gilded cages, Louise demanded artistic control. She rejected roles that portrayed women as accessories. When Paramount pushed back, she walked away. A move unheard of for an actress at her peak. And then came Pandora's Box, 1929. A German director, G. W. Pabst, saw in her what Hollywood couldn't: truth. He offered her the role of Lulu, a free-spirited woman whose sensuality both empowers and destroys her. Brooks accepted, sailing to Europe without permission from her studio. That single decision, reckless and brave, changed film history. On camera, she wasn't acting, she was bleeding. Every flicker of fear, every flash of desire felt real because it was. Critics in Europe were stunned. Pabst said of her, "She is the only actress who can transform neurosis into grace." The film scandalized America, but immortalized her abroad. When Pandora's Box premiered, it was banned in several cities for moral corruption. Yet, in Berlin and Paris, audiences saw something revolutionary. A woman who refused to apologize for being alive. For a moment, Louise Brooks was not just a star. She was the embodiment of artistic freedom. But glory always demands a sacrifice. When she returned to the United States, Hollywood closed its doors. She had broken the unspoken rules. She had refused to flatter the powerful, refused to trade favors for fame, refused to be owned. Paramount executives blacklisted her quietly. No one would hire the difficult woman. Within months, her salary plummeted from thousands of dollars to zero. The tabloids called her self-destructive. But what they never said was that her defiance wasn't madness. It was survival. She'd rather starve on her own terms than live as someone else's creation. To make ends meet, she taught dance, worked retail, and took small modeling jobs. The woman once compared to Garbo was suddenly reduced to waiting for the mailman, hoping for a forgotten royalty check. Yet she never begged for work. She wrote in her diary, "Hollywood hates the woman who knows too much, and I knew everything." And crest and descendants of Dorgans. Still, she never lost her magnetism. In dim bars and crowded apartments, people whispered about her. The star who had vanished, the ghost who had burned too bright. She was seen occasionally walking through New York, wrapped in black, her gaze untamed as ever. She might have been broke, but she wasn't broken. Every choice she made, every bridge she burned, came from the same fire that had fueled her since childhood, a refusal to be defined by anyone but herself. Louise Brooks had traded fame for freedom, applause for truth. In the golden age of control, she became the patron saint of defiance. And while Hollywood turned its back, Europe built her legend. One that would outlive every producer who tried to silence her. Her rise was brilliant, her fall inevitable. But even as the lights dimmed, she never once regretted the price she paid. "I paid dearly for my freedom," she would later write, "but it was the only currency I ever trusted." End course. Fame had given Louise Brooks the illusion of control, but love would strip that illusion away. In her films, she played women who toyed with men's hearts. But in real life, the men around her were far more dangerous players. They wanted to possess her, not understand her. Her first marriage to director Eddie Sutherland began like a Hollywood fairy tale. The gifted actress and the witty filmmaker. But within months, the magic soured. Sutherland adored Louise's brilliance, but despised her independence. Their arguments became public. Studio insiders whispered that she humiliated him in front of friends, while others said he tried to cage her with jealousy. Louise later described marriage as a small theater of cruelty, where the performance never ended. When he demanded she abandon acting to become a proper wife, she packed her bags and left. No goodbye, no tears. Freedom came at a cost: loneliness. In the smoky clubs of New York and the film salons of Paris, she sought connection in fleeting lovers, poets, producers, aristocrats, and artists. Some were enchanted by her wit, others simply wanted to conquer the legend. Louise, who once said, "I like to be admired, but I can't stand to be owned," mistook attention for affection. She entered each affair like a new film role. All intensity, no script, no ending. Then came George Preston Marshall, a Washington tycoon who promised to protect her, but instead tightened the leash. He financed her life, showered her with diamonds, but expected obedience. To him, Louise was both muse and property. When she rebelled, disappearing for days, dancing with strangers, refusing to answer his calls. Marshall retaliated in the only way powerful men knew: humiliation. He spread rumors of her promiscuity, calling her unstable, unfit, a fallen goddess. Brooks endured the insults with the same icy poise that once mesmerized audiences. But privately, she unraveled. The tabloids painted her as a reckless woman, an alcoholic spiraling toward ruin. Behind those headlines was a deeper truth. She was self-medicating against decades of pain. Alcohol dulled the echoes of her mother's voice, of Pabst's camera, of lovers who promised salvation but delivered silence. One friend recalled finding her in her apartment, curtains drawn, a bottle of gin, and a half-burned cigarette beside a pile of unsent letters. "She talked about disappearing," he said, as if vanishing was her final performance. If you won, Louise's wit never left her, even at her lowest. Once, when asked if she ever loved anyone, she replied, "Of course." But it was usually a mistake. She was incapable of soft love, only love that bruised. The cruelty she endured as a child had taught her that affection always came with punishment, and so she sought men who confirmed that belief. By her mid-30s, she was no longer the flapper girl who danced on tabletops. She was a shadow of that spirit. Glamorous, broken, unmoored. Marshall abandoned her completely, marrying another woman while ensuring that Louise's name remained synonymous with scandal. When she read the news in the papers, she reportedly laughed. "I guess he wanted someone easier to own," she told a friend, pouring another drink. Her career was over, her reputation shredded. Hollywood had long forgotten her. Yet, even in the wreckage, Brooks refused to play victim. She wore her tragedies like perfume, something intoxicating and dangerous. Lovers still sought her out, drawn not to her beauty, but to her darkness. She gave them pieces of herself, knowing they would never stay. One evening, years later, an admirer told her she looked lonely. She smiled and replied, "Lonely people are the most interesting. We know how to perform." It's not the self-is-Dovenin-9. It was perhaps the most honest confession she ever made. For Louise Brooks, love was not a refuge. It was another stage. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every night spent drinking in silence was part of the same performance, the doomed search for someone who could see the real woman behind the myth. But no one ever did. And as the world moved on, her tragedy deepened. Not because she lost fame, but because she had once touched a freedom so pure that no one else could live up to it. Her story was no longer about Hollywood or stardom. It had become a portrait of self-destruction, painted in whispers, regret, and empty glasses. By the time the 1940 seconds arrived, the woman who once embodied modern glamour had vanished into the fog of anonymity. Louise Brooks, the rebel who refused to kneel before Hollywood's gods, was now a forgotten silhouette wandering through the streets of New York. The once famous actress lived in a cramped, dark apartment above a grocery store, surviving on meager pay from typing jobs and the occasional check from old friends. Fame, like a cruel lover, had abandoned her without apology. Neighbors described her as the woman who never smiled. Each morning she would descend the narrow stairway in black clothes, her once famous bob streaked with gray. She moved through life like an echo, visible but no longer heard. The years of rejection had taken their toll. She had traded movie lights for dim bulbs, champagne for gin, applause for silence. Alcohol became her final co-star. She drank not to forget, but to remember differently, to distort the sharp edges of regret. In interviews decades later, she would admit with disarming honesty, "I wasn't drinking to die. I was drinking to disappear." It's not the self meeting as five life. It's not the second two. She went through bottles the way she once went through film scripts. Restlessly, desperately, searching for meaning. Her health deteriorated rapidly. Friends recalled her trembling hands, the way she coughed in the mornings, her weight shrinking until she seemed carved out of shadows. Doctors warned her about cirrhosis, but she laughed it off. "A woman like me," she said, "wasn't meant to die of good health." Her humor was the last mask she refused to take off. In 1955, everything shifted. A young film historian named James Card rediscovered her old films while working for the Eastman House Archives in Rochester. He was astonished by the raw energy of Pandora's box and set out to find the woman who had created Lulu. When he located her, she was living in near destitution, surviving mostly on canned soup and pride. Card persuaded her to move to Rochester, where he promised a small stipend and work cataloging silent-era films. The resurrection of Louise Brooks began quietly, not with flashbulbs, but with ink. Encouraged by Card, she started writing. The words that had once been locked behind a lifetime of silence spilled onto the page with surgical precision. In her essays and letters, later collected as Lulu in Hollywood, she dissected the hypocrisy of fame, the cruelty of the studio system, and her own complicity in self-destruction. She wrote, "Hollywood is a place where they'll pay you $1,000 for a kiss and 50 cents for your soul." My endevenant. The line became immortal. A razor wrapped in velvet. Europe rediscovered her first. French cinephiles, led by Henri Langlois, championed her as the true spirit of cinema. He famously declared, "There is no Garbo, no Dietrich. There is only Louise Brooks." My endevenant. Suddenly, the ghost from Kansas was reborn as a legend. Festivals screened her films to packed audiences. Young actresses in Paris cut their hair to mimic her bob. For the first time in decades, Louise felt seen again. Not as an object, but as an artist. Yet redemption did not erase the scars. Behind her sharp essays and wit lay decades of trauma untreated. She had long suffered from symptoms now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, insomnia, emotional detachment. She once confessed, "I have lived as a statue, admired, forgotten, and cold." My endevenant. Even in her later years, she kept people at arm's length, fearing that closeness would reopen wounds she'd spent a lifetime hiding under sarcasm. Her relationship with Card though platonic, was the closest thing to love she allowed herself in her final decades. He cared for her quietly, making sure she had food, company, and dignity. But even he admitted that she remained untouchable. A fortress built from irony and beauty. My endeavant. By the 1,970 seconds, critics hailed her as the missing link between silent cinema and modern film acting. Scholars dissected Pandora's Box as an early study of female autonomy and exploitation, themes decades ahead of their time. Louise attended a few retrospectives but always refused interviews unless she could rewrite the questions herself. "Everyone wants my tragedy," she said, "but few can stand my truth." 18 stated Bisses. In the final years of her life, she was diagnosed with emphysema and heart disease, the natural consequence of decades of chain smoking and heavy drinking. Yet, she refused hospital care. "I started this performance," she told a friend, "and I'll finish it on my own stage." Her small Rochester apartment became her sanctuary and her prison. Surrounded by stacks of books, film stills, and half-empty bottles, she would spend evenings watching old comedies in silence. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she did both at once. When she died in August 1985, aged 78, there was no fanfare. Just a brief obituary in a few papers. But within months, tributes poured in from filmmakers and actors across the world. The New York Times called her the first truly modern woman of film. Jean-Luc Godard cited her as an influence. Madonna and Uma Thurman would later echo her style. Her image, the black bob, the defiant stare, became a visual shorthand for rebellion and mystery. Louise Brooks had finally won the immortality she never sought. Not through fame, but through defiance. Her life was a cautionary tale and a manifesto rolled into one, a story of how the pursuit of freedom can both destroy and redeem. Her tragedy was not that Hollywood forgot her. It was that the world remembered her only after she stopped caring. And yet, perhaps that was the truest ending for a woman who had spent her entire life refusing to play anyone's role but her own. "I never gave away anything without wishing I had kept it, nor kept anything without wishing I had given it away," she once wrote. A confession, a warning, and a eulogy. All in one breath. Louise Brooks did not die in despair. She died having told her story her way. Sharp, unflinching, and painfully alive.